Hi everyone, my night owls. Hi Shannon. I've started an Instagram recently to um, try to find more of my ideal clients. Uh, yeah, just trying to see what marketing on Instagram does for my business. And Shannon's been a great follower, as has Darby and Candace. This is great. Okay, so we'll get started. My name's Olivia Swenson. I'm the editor for Owl Hollow Press. And I just wanted to start by congratulating OHP because this is their 5-year anniversary. So you can follow them on any social media site. They're doing 5 weeks of giveaways and they're just amazing. So I really encourage you to support them any way you can. And I'm going to announce that again at the end because I really want people to take advantage of the prizes and just celebrating Owl Hall. Owl Hall Press. They're just great. So a little bit about me for anyone who doesn't know me. I run my own editing business called Olivia Edits, and I've been editing. I started that in 2016. I've been editing since 2013. I graduated with a minor in editing, and I really have a passion for science fiction and fantasy. That's kind of my specialty. For Aloe Hollow, I do all their fiction editing, which is mostly young adult and middle grade, which I absolutely love. I was a really voracious reader as a kid, and so it's really fun to get paid to what I love to do, for what I love to do. So today we're going to be talking about style sheets, which maybe sounds boring. um, and we're going to try to make it interesting. I think it sounds boring, at least when I think about it, because style sheets are usually a copy editor tool. So let's talk about what a style sheet is. It's a reference document. This sounds even more boring. It's a reference document for your specific story. And so there are like grammar references, like the Chicago Manual of Style is kind of the fiction grammar Bible, if you will. And so you might be wondering why you need a reference document for your own story. And the benefit of a style sheet is that it's catered to your exact needs. Chicago is really broad and general, and it doesn't give exact guidance on a lot of things. And so a style sheet for a copy editor is useful because it standardizes how character thoughts are handled, or how certain things are spelled. So it's just kind of like a way to standardize those issues. So style sheets are a way to organize the details of your story into appropriate categories. Common categories include characters, timeline, unique terms and phrases, and style. So let's go over kind of what's in those. We'll be talking about these copy editor style sheet categories, and then we'll talk, just to get you familiar with what a style sheet is, and then we'll talk about how authors can use style sheets to help self-edit, which is a use of style sheets that isn't really common, or I haven't really heard people talk about it, but I think it would be a really useful tool. So when a copy editor is making a style sheet, they're reading through the manuscript and they're taking the details that they find about characters, timeline, terms, and style, and putting it all into one document. And that's so that they can see making sure details are consistent throughout. And so like the character category of a style sheet would have a list of all the character names, and then under each character name, it would include any physical descriptions, any personality descriptions, anything about that character that's mentioned in the text. The timeline category is really similar. I usually start with like day 1 or day 0, and I just go through anytime the author mentions kind of like a timestamp, 1 day later, the next evening, whatever. I kind of copy and paste that into the document, into the style sheet, so that I can keep track of how much time is passing and make sure the timing of things lines up. Terms, if your story has any unique terms, or maybe another language that is used sometimes. Some authors kind of make up curses or have sayings that their characters use that are unique to their story. I'll kind of put those all together in the terms category so that I can keep them straight. and make sure they're used consistently. And then the style category is just like I was talking about before, how you handle character thoughts, how you handle scene breaks, if you use the three asterisks or something else, um, how you format signs, like when you read a stop sign, how does that appear in the book? Is it all in capitals? Is it in small caps? Just like all these little nitty gritty things that copy editors are really good at. So that's what a copy editor style sheet looks like. And obviously you can kind of see the benefits of it. It's really useful for keeping things consistent. Um, there's been quite a few times when I'm going through a book and a character's eye color will change, and I'll only notice because I've been keeping a style sheet, and I can see like, oh, this character's eyes were blue earlier and now they're brown. So let's keep that consistent. Um, so yeah, style sheets are an editor's friend for sure. And you probably shouldn't hire an editor unless they offer a style sheet as part of their services. And we can talk about what to look for when you're hiring an editor another time, but that's a pretty important way to identify an editor who isn't cutting corners and really knows what they're doing. Um, and I will admit, I didn't always do style sheets because some of the publishers I've worked for in the past, I didn't feel like they paid me enough to warrant the time it takes to make a style sheet, because it does take time. But with Owl Hollow and with the authors I work for, they are I always make style sheets because they're just really necessary for high quality stories and work. Okay, so how are these useful for authors? Um, what I think is cool about a style sheet is that it's kind of the essence of your story, just the details all put into categories. So it's like a really analytical, formulaic kind of look at your story that allows you to look at your story with a new set of eyes, a fresh set of eyes, which is usually what the editor is for. But if you're making a style sheet for your own story as an author, the key there is to just copy and paste from your story into the style sheet. And when you're done, so that means, for example, if you're looking at the characters in your book, you see the initial description of your main character, and you just copy and paste that literal description into your style sheet. And you're going through the story and you just copy and paste exactly what you have already written about that character into the style sheet. And that way you kind of separate what you think you've written and what you've actually written. And the style sheet kind of identifies what you've actually written. So you can see, after you've gone through your story and created your own author style sheet, where there might be holes, kind of the same things that are useful for a copy editor to make a style sheet for, except for the author, it's a way to self-edit. And I'm mostly a developmental editor, so my style sheets are usually a lot more involved than a copy editor. Everyone's comments are really nice. I need to also talk slower because I talk a million miles an hour. Okay, so yeah, so an author style sheet is really similar to probably a developmental editor's style sheet, because it's going to be a lot more involved. There's a link in the description of this Facebook Live where I've made a template of a style sheet, and it has a lot more categories than just the 4 that I mentioned for copy editors, which are characters, timeline, terms, and style. So for authors that have a mostly finished draft, a finished draft, even some work may be caught, if they have a pretty developed story idea, they can use a style sheet. They can use the exercise of going through and copy and pasting their details into a style sheet to really look at their manuscript with fresh eyes. So let's see. I know some authors use character bios as when they're kind of creating their story. And I'll talk a little later about how somebody who just has a story idea can use a style sheet to help kind of get them on the road to writing. It's not quite as useful, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. So the categories that I often use as a developmental editor that I think would be useful for authors are characters, geography, and by geography, maybe there's a better word for that, but I just mean any place that's mentioned in your book, any place. Like somebody's house, somebody's address, somebody's country, somebody's the forest, the river, the city, really the street name, really anything that's mentioned, the planet. Um, the geography there is going to be important to making your world feel cohesive and just including just identifying those details that are in your story is going to help you. I'm distracted by the people leaving such nice comments on here. Um, so yeah, so that's geography, timeline, unique terms and phrases, which we've already talked about. And then, so those four appear in every developmental edit I do: character, geography, timeline, unique terms and phrases. I saw somebody was saying they were taking notes. Don't take notes. In the template I have in the Facebook Live description, it has all of this and probably better worded than I'm saying out loud right now. And then there's other categories that I'll have that are specific to each story. And this is one of the things I just love about editing, because each story has its own unique themes and world building elements that are going to kind of cross over into other books. And so some other categories I've kind of seen include animals or nature. So I just worked on, well, I'll just list them and then I'll talk about some of the books that I've worked on recently that these categories have been really useful for. So animals or nature, the magic system or rules, if it's a fantasy, or like the technology and the tech inventions that's used if it's science fiction. Items of interest is kind of a vague one, but sometimes when I'm reading through a story, I'll notice an object and I'm like, maybe this will be relevant later. And so I have just, this is kind of like a catch-all category where I put those things where I'm not sure if they're going to be relevant, but maybe they are. Words from another language. This can be either a made-up language that you've invented for your book, where maybe characters say different words in this new language, or it could just be any foreign language that isn't English. It's nice to have those all in one place so that when you need to maybe check them with the native speaker, you don't have to find all the instances in your manuscript. They're just all already together. Culture is another category. What other ones do I have here? Let's see. On the template, I'm going to pull it up right now. Hopefully, tell me if you guys have any problems opening the template. Okay, so we have characters. Yeah, characters, geography, unique terms and phrases, timeline, cultures, other language. Oh yeah, and then there's editor. The editor categories, which aren't important for you guys really, are spelling and capitalization and style. And those things are really only relevant once you are at the point where you need a copy editor. So those are on the template, but really just for your own information and not anything else. Okay, so it might feel a little overwhelming to think about making a style sheet. But really the best part is that you're not rewriting your story. The point of the style sheet for an author is to just see what details are already in your story. And so you just copy and paste. So step one, you highlight the detail you want to add to the style sheet, you copy it, and you paste it into the category. It's hopefully, it's maybe time consuming, but it's a really simple process with, I think, a lot of nice rewards. So let's give some examples of how this, I'll go over some of the stories I've edited for Owl Hollow and what their style sheets looked like. So to hopefully give you an idea, because I understand, because I've been doing this for a lot of books, it's kind of easier for me to know what categories to make and what details to include in the style sheet. So hopefully by going over some examples, that will kind of help you figure out for your own story. And also at the end, I'm happy to answer any questions. So if you have any questions while I'm going through about style sheets or really anything editing related, I'm happy to answer them. I can see your comments over here. Shannon says style sheets sound like fun. Thanks, Shannon. You might be one of the few people that think that. But whether they're fun or not, it's hard to deny how useful they are. So, okay, so let's talk about the first example I'm going to talk about is Lazarus by Marion Malone Woods. I'll give you a little synopsis that's useful for understanding what categories you're going to need. So I really love this book. The synopsis is Margot and Hank are two teens in tiny, godforsaken Lazarus, Nebraska. They have a profoundly deep relationship. The only hitch is that Hank has been dead for 2 months. For some reason, he's remained in limbo. Neither is complaining, as it means they get to continue spending time together, even if no one else can see Hank. When the pair get tangled up investigating the latest local murder, with Margot doing the everyday detective work and the late Hank spying on suspects unseen, they discover nothing and no one in Lazarus are as they seem. So with this style sheet, I had the normal four categories: characters, timeline, geography, unique terms, and then I also had a lot of spelling stuff, of course, because I was a copy editor. I had abbreviations. There was a few abbreviations that I wasn't familiar with, and so I wanted to keep those straight. With characters, I wanted to make sure you want to keep track of even characters that have died. So Margot's mom had died, one of the main characters, her mom. And so I wanted to keep track of the details that are mentioned about her mom and make sure that they were consistent. And also to see if maybe you could add, if the author could add in more detail about maybe Margot's remembrances of her mom, or how Margot thinks about things, how they've been affected by her mom. Those details about her mom are going to affect Margot, and so I wanted to see how those could kind of strengthen each other. I had an items of interest category for Lazarus because there was a bunch of newspapers listed, and I think she made up some of them, so I wanted to make sure the names were consistent. And then there was some random details about where different characters kept guns or just other things I wanted to keep straight so that they were consistent, because as a murder mystery, you want to make sure all those details are really nailed down. And then for geography, the whole place was one small town. The whole story was located in one small town. So she mentioned a lot of specific streets. And so it was important to get that geography down so that the town felt realistic. So that was the example of Lazarus. Another book, so that was like a young adult mystery genre. Another example for middle grade, Kiki McAdoo and the Graveyard Ballerinas by Colette Sewell. The synopsis here is: when 11-year-old Kiki McAdoo and her talented older sister go to Mount Phelan Dance Conservatory for the summer, they ignore the brochure's mysterious warning that ballets come alive in the nearby forest. But after her sister disappears, it's up to Kiki to brave the woods and save her sister from the ghost sylphs that dance young girls to their deaths. Another really great, this is why I love my job, because I get to read awesome stories like this. So for this one, I used characters. In addition to physical characteristics, which is kind of a given, you want to include really any detail. So in this one, several characters had allergies, so you just wanted to make note of that. This is another one where Kiki, the main character's mom, had died, and there are several details about things her mom liked that influenced Kiki's preference for things, like polka dots and chocolate chip cookies. So you just want those kind of details could come up later. And that's one nice thing about style sheets, is that maybe you've mentioned a detail at one point in your story, and it could be relevant again later in your story, and kind of make that character feel more real and give that character more depth to bring that up again. It also might be useful to include common body language that a character uses. That can help you identify maybe if you're overusing a certain type of body language. A lot of authors overuse touching hair or smiling. And so if you are aware of like what the unique things are about your characters, as you've noted with your details in your style sheet, you can come up with body language that's more unique to your specific characters. It's also important to note the nicknames of characters as part of the character category. So for this one, I had a category that was rules for dance camp, because there was, just the rules, and then also the dance camp schedule, so that when Kiki was doing different things, it was actually during her free time. That can sometimes be a constraint on characters, because authors want them to be doing something, but I'm like, oh, they're supposed to be in like pirouette class, or I forget. I'm terrible. I don't know anything about ballet even after reading this book. It was a long time ago. Anyways, so that's just one thing to keep in mind. And then unique words. Her mom used Kiki's mom would say the phrase "lovely jubbly," which is a British expression of happiness, and that was just something I wanted to make sure we got right and maybe used a couple more times because I thought it was really cool. Other categories I used just for this specific story were ballet terms, animals slash non-human beings because there were fairies and fantastical beasts like the brown sloch and the Willis. Um, so yeah, just all these things you want to keep consistent. That's really the main usefulness of a style sheet. And then an author and a development editor can help kind of go one step further than just consistency and make things have more deep. Yes, Katerina, raising eyebrows, sigh, gasp, groan from Shannon. Yes, there's a lot of overused body language, and I think they have their place. Um, the key is just to not overuse them. What else? Let's see. Oh yeah, okay. So for Kiki McAdoo, for the timeline, I divided it up by days and chapters. So I would have the timeline is going to be how you handle keeping track of your timeline in your style sheet is going to really depend on what kind of book you have, because there are some books like Todd's book, The Namer of Spirits, that I just worked on that's coming out this fall. I think the whole thing takes place in 8 or 9 days. And so it's really easy to say, day one, this is what happens. Day two, this is what happens. Other books kind of span months or years or just a lot longer. And so you'll just have to kind of think about what timeline will be most useful for you. And for the timeline, this is a place where I don't copy and paste as the editor. You'll have to think about what you want to do as the author. I would copy and paste anything that referred to things either coming up in the future or things that had happened in the past. So if there's a line that says 2 weeks ago, X, Y, and Z happened, I would put that in my timeline category and then just use that to either verify that that did indeed happen 2 weeks ago um, or yeah, just to verify that the timeline actually worked out. So, okay, so I'll just do one more. Well, there's so many good stories here. Okay, the Spirits of Chaos series by Nicole Conway. She's written 2 books that I've edited for that series, Scales and Wings, and I think she's sending me the 3rd one later this month, so I'm very excited about that. But the synopsis of this series is, when New York City faces the threat of an ancient evil, a teenage boy must use a magical bracelet to transform into a monster-slaying dragon superhero. I think Todd had said these synopses are cool, and I agree. I just got them off Owlholla Press's website, and I shortened them kind of and edited them because that's what I do. So for a series for style sheets, I always make a new style sheet. So I'll make a style sheet for the first book, and then I make a totally new style sheet for the second book. And then I'll go back, after I've already read the second book, I'll go back and compare the style sheets of the two and make sure that the details in the second one match the details of the first one. And this is more of a copy editor thing or developmental editor thing. This isn't necessarily useful for authors, but it is really useful when you have a style sheet for your first book that you can make sure the details for your second book are correct because you can refer to the first book style sheet. So some unique things for characters I included for this one were some of the characters had scars from previous battles, so you want to make sure those scars are located in the same place. The characters are in high school, so you want to make sure their class schedules are correct. In this one, Koji, the main character, leaves from his bedroom window often, and so you want to maybe make sure like the layout of the room is always the same. So that makes sense. This one I had an aircraft category because there's lots of military planes. That I wanted to keep straight. And then this one had there's like a whole magic system with the bracelet that Koji uses to turn into a dragon. It's called the totem. And so there's just a lot of kind of vocabulary and how that works. And so that all got into its own category. Another thing that was interesting, especially with series, is that there are some things that are kind of changing that are minor details, like their relationships that are changing. So Koji's relationship with the government, you can probably understand how, because Koji can turn into a superhero dragon, the United States government wants to kind of keep tabs on him, and his relationship with the government is always changing. And so I had a category that was kind of noting the details. This was just a minor thing that kind of came up every now and then, but I wanted to make sure that that relationship was consistent and that, or that it's, that however it was changing made sense. And just identifying those details in the story and putting them in a separate document so I could see them all together was really helpful in making sure that was a consistent changing relationship. Okay. Um, let's see. Should I do one more and then we can ask? I haven't seen any questions yet. But if you have any about anything, please ask them. Okay, we'll just go with one more. Um, let's do, well, we'll do the we'll do The Girl and the Tiger by Paul Rosalie because this is one of my favorite books. So the synopsis, this is an adult book, but it's kind of a unique book because it's definitely for adult readers, I think, or probably 15 and up. There's no romance, so it's kind of hard to classify it as a YA. Anyways, the synopsis is when Isha is sent away to live with her grandparents in the Indian countryside, she discovers a sacred grove where a young Bengal tiger has taken refuge. Isha knows that the ever-shrinking forests of India mean there are few places left for a tiger to hide. When the local villagers also discover the tiger, Isha finds herself embroiled in a life or death cultural controversy. So because this one took place in India, and because the author is actually married to an Indian, and he spent a lot of time in India, there were that was awesome because it added a lot of depth to his story. But also there was a ton of foreign words, and there's also like different Indian languages, and so that was like a really big project to keep straight all of the Indian words. Also, it was really important to keep track of the timeline closely and to see what aligned with different Indian holidays and how that would affect what was going on in the story. And also just the seasons in India, making sure, because this book spanned at least a year. Um, and so, yeah, you just had to kind of match up all of these things with a broader scope of the timeline. And these are all things that I think authors can do themselves by creating their own style sheet. So, yeah, so I hope that you feel empowered to use style sheets to make your story stronger and to kind of up. You can see that making a style sheet gives you a fresh set of eyes, just because it identifies the details that you have written and doesn't make you, and so that way your perception of what you think you have written is not going to appear in the style sheet. It's only what you've written will appear in the style sheet, and so it just takes away what you think you've written and gives you just what you actually have written, which I think is useful for an editor who's trying to self-edit. So the very last like little minor point I wanted to talk about is how even if you just have a story idea, a style sheet can be useful to kind of start fleshing out your ideas. So obviously when you're writing a story, there's kind of two ways you can do it. You can plan or you can pants. So planners kind of organize everything in a draft, not in a draft, in an outline. They have kind of all their main plot points. They have their character bios. They have everything planned out. And then pantsing is kind of you just write, and whatever comes to your mind, you write it. And it probably involves a lot more rewriting, but I know people who plan with their outlines that they also end up deviating. So, so using a style sheet is more of a planning strategy, obviously, because you're not just writing your story. And I actually tried doing this with one of my own story ideas, of which I just have kind of a running document for the one day when I write a book, I guess. But it was really interesting. I just had this story idea. I really like post-apocalyptic stories, and when we lived in Pittsburgh for a few years, and we lived in an area of Pittsburgh that was kind of being redone. So a lot of the houses were really big. It used to be a really affluent part of Pittsburgh, like back when Carnegie was the steel guru. Wrong word. But anyways, So it used to be this really affluent part of town. So there's all these huge houses that have since kind of been run down. Anyways, it kind of looked to me like a post-apocalyptic place because there were a lot of abandoned houses that had plants growing in them. And there's these alleyways with overflowing dumpsters and mice and lots of cats. And the sidewalks were all cracked. And it just made me, I could just kind of envision this story of 20 years after some unknown disaster happened. Um, there's people, survivors that are left, and the only survivors that have really made it out are the people that have really aggressive fight responses. And so when you are faced with a kind of threatening situation, you have the fight or flight, and the people who run eventually die because they can't fight for the food that they need. Anyways, so I just ended up trying to fill in all of these different categories in my style sheet for the story idea I had. And it was really a really interesting way for me to just ask myself some questions and kind of just start fleshing out this idea. And it kind of having a style sheet when you just have an idea, trying to fill out just a style sheet for your story idea, is kind of takes the pressure off of writing. Sometimes I feel like I don't even know where to start writing. But when you have like, when we talk about when I have a character category, let me just write down some of the characters that I'm thinking of for the story. And then I have a geography, and I'm like, okay, this place takes place in Pittsburgh in this area. And you can kind of just start writing down the details that come to your mind, and that can be a little easier than trying to start writing an entire book. So that's one way that a style sheet can be useful for story planning and organization. And obviously you can take that as far as you want to take it. But so yeah, so that's my spiel on style sheets. Darby says, I'll answer questions now. I see some, one from Darby. Todd says I addressed his question, so great. I'm glad I could answer it without even knowing it. Darby says, how do you handle specific terms that are a bit obscure? I'm thinking about all the equestrian. Is it equine? I think it's equine. This is the problem with reading. I don't know how to pronounce words. I'm thinking of all the equestrian terms I use. Yes, I would do like a horse term category or something. So like with Scales and Wings, the Spirits of Chaos series, I had that aircraft. I had a category that's just for aircraft because I didn't know. I wanted to keep those in one specific place that I could refer to really easily. And I know with you, Darby, like with your On a Good Horse, I don't even know if I shared my style sheet with you for that one. But yeah, I would just definitely, I remember from On a Good Horse, there were like some questions I had about, was there a space in horseshoer? Or, just questions I had that I had to keep consistent throughout. And that is definitely for your books that have a lot of horse terms, all the different kinds of horses, you just want to make sure you handle those consistently. You just make that its own category. Katerina says, fight, flight, or pet befriend remaining cats. Yes, maybe that can be the climax. The cats end up somehow saving the main character because she's befriended them. Let me make sure there's no other questions in here. Yeah, lots of overused body language. Maybe I should talk about that sometime. I also just want to mention one more time that it's Owl Hollow Press's 5-year anniversary. So please go follow them and take advantage of their 5 weeks of prizes because they're awesome. They give great prizes, and you're just supporting a really amazing indie publisher. Yeah. Okay, does anyone have any other questions, or should we wrap this up? Candace said she'd read that. Planet of the Cats. I used to actually be terrified of cats. I had a nightmare once where I probably shouldn't even say this. The cat controlled my arms by sinking its claws into my shoulder blades. It was terrifying, and I was scared of cats for the next many years until I married my husband, who had grown up with cats, and then we had lots of cats. Anyways, okay. Thank you all for being here and supporting me, and hopefully please access the just as a reminder, in the notes in the Facebook Live description, there's a link where you can download a template for a style sheet, and I have pretty much everything I talked about in that document. So hopefully that's useful to you. I'd love to hear uh, any success stories or anything useful you find from using style sheets. And um, yeah, I just thank you guys all for being a great community, and I'll talk to you all soon.
Subscribe to our channel so you'll never miss an upload, or join us live every Thursday for author interviews, book clubs, writing advice, and more on Facebook at Owl Hollow Press, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. See you Thursday.